Welcome back to the Partner Marketing Unlocked podcast, the podcast where we break down real co marketing strategies, ecosystem insights, and stories from partner marketers and channel managers in the field. I'm your host, Amir Motameni. And for today's episode, we're going to be talking about one of the most common tactics that you can do in partner marketing, and that's the joint webinar. So, webinars sometimes get a bad rap. People think they're old school, and usually, when marketers run webinars, they're usually a one off activity, and you don't typically see the right results. And the truth is, when you run webinars the right way with the right partner and you plan them effectively, these can be one of the most efficient lead generation and brand awareness plays that a partner marketing manager can run. So, today I'm going to break down the anatomy of a good co marketing webinar and talk about why I think webinars still matter and how to make sure that you can incorporate them as part of an integrated campaign and not just a random one off activity that your audience doesn't remember. So, why do webinars still matter? So, I think webinars are still very important. A well executed partner webinar does a few things, and I still think they're very important strategy and a great tactic. And the benefit of doing a joint webinar versus just doing an internal webinar is it puts both of your brands side by side in front of a targeted audience. It provides value to your customers through hopeful education and thought leadership and not a sales pitch. And most importantly, it generates leads that you can both act on. And unlike a static asset like a blog post or an ebook, webinars are interactive. You get registrations, you actually get to see who attends the webinar live. You can capture engagement and interact with the audience through polls, through Q&A at the end of the webinar. And so it's a way to build credibility in real time with your customers or with your prospects. And for partners, that's gold. So you're obviously generating warmer leads that are actually attending your webinar live, watching the entire webinar, asking questions. They're engaging with the polls. Those are going to be warmer leads than folks who just downloaded a white paper or an ebook and who has never followed up with your sales team, who has never really interacted or engaged with any other assets. So this is great. You're inviting them to a live conversation with your customers and your prospects, and your partners are going to be able to follow up with these leads after the event. So let's talk about the anatomy of what makes a good co-marketing webinar. So I think the first thing you need to focus on is the topic and the theme. And the topic has to solve a real problem that your joint audience cares about. So if your webinar is just a demo of your product or integration with one of your partners' products, if it just sounds like two vendors are pitching their products and their services, people will check out. People are not going to care about the webinar. You need to obviously earn that trust. Like, they're not going to be at the end of the buyer's stage. Like, they're not going to be in the consideration or decision stage. Like, you need to focus on leading with insights, with trends, with pain points. It needs to be upper funnel. It needs to be thought leadership. You need to be solving their pain points and earning that trust and nurturing them down the funnel, educating them eventually with other assets, with other pieces, with other tactics to get them to finally want to talk to your sales team or even go through that demo. So you got to make sure that it's an upper funnel tactic and it's solving real problems that they're facing within their function. Next, you need to have a clear partner value prop. So both partners need a role. So um, you need to define your role in this webinar, whether you're the host or the MC. Um, and you need to define the partner's role. Like, are they the ones who are going to be the subject matter experts? Are they the ones who are going to be bringing the thought leadership? Are they the ones who are going to be bringing the customer story, essentially? Um, you need to have that clear value prop of what value are you bringing and what value is your partner bringing. And so you need to be able to fill up that space and make sure there's clear defined value and roles with your partner. You need to also create a joint registration page, so you don't need to have multiple registration page. This is critical. One landing page, both logos. You got to co-brand those. You got to have a simple form. You don't want to have a million fields. You want to make it as easy as possible for the person to register for the webinar. Both partners need to drive traffic to the same place. Again, you don't want it to be disjointed and driving them to separate landing pages. So having one single landing page makes keeping track of that data clean, and it makes it like a truly joint effort, which is a good thing. You need to focus on the promotion plan as well as part of the anatomy of a great co-marketing webinar. So you can't just rely on your partner to provide a speaker. You can't just rely on your partner to send one email. Both should commit to promotions, and you should have a plan that should be trying to generate registrations through your email databases, through your social media, so through LinkedIn posts, through Facebook posts. Maybe you can do some light paid ads depending on if you have budget or not. But either way, you want to make sure that you guys have the messaging aligned. And if you want to enable your partner, then you give each partner ready to use copy, ready to use graphics. And the call to action is always going to be register. So you're going to have the link to the registration in every single email and every single social post or even a blog if you're going to be promoting registrations for the webinar. So in terms of the actual content itself, you want to keep it tight. Typically, webinars should be 30 to 35 minutes, and then you should have like a 10 to 15-minute Q&A at the end of the webinar. So you want to open up with a problem statement and talk about how you're going to help the audience understand how they could solve those problems, whether it's through software or whatever it may be, the services that your partner offers. But ideally, you don't want to focus on what you're doing. Essentially, you want to focus on that pain point and how, in general and broadly, those problems could be solved. So you want to show both perspectives, and you want to have a clear next step after the webinar. Follow up is also huge when it comes to webinars. So you want to make sure that that sequencing is tight also. So we'll get deeper into this later in this episode, but we don't want leads to be just hanging there and not followed up. So both partners need a follow up plan, whether that's emails or the SDRs following up through phone calls. You want a nurture track from both you and your partner. So another thing, again, webinars must be included in a integrated campaign. So this is where a lot of companies go wrong. They treat webinars as a one-off event. I'm guilty of doing that plenty of times with partners. And so you run it, you click the list of names, and then everyone moves on. But the reality is a webinar should also be a part of a broader integrated campaign. And here's what that could look like. So before the webinar, you could posts, blog posts, social posts, or even create some sort of ebook or white paper around the topic and the theme that the webinar is going to be based on. And you start promoting that blog post, that social media post, that white paper. Ideally, you start generating leads from that white paper or that ebook that is gated. Then you retarget and invite those folks who downloaded that asset to the webinar itself. So then you have the live webinar where both brands are visible. You and the partner are going to be hosting and presenting this webinar, and you're going to be retargeting those folks based on that first activity. Post webinar, you're going to then turn that recording into a on-demand asset. Then you can repurpose clips on LinkedIn as well as through YouTube, and you can include it in your partner newsletter. But ultimately, you want to nurture those leads. Like you want to put those webinar leads into a nurture stream, and then you want your sales team to obviously follow up on those leads as well. So speaking of follow up, so post webinar follow up is critical. You want to make sure that you give the leads to your partner if you're hosting the webinar as soon as possible, and you want them to follow the up with those leads as soon as they can. So a successful partner webinar, again, doesn't end when the cameras turn off. It ends when the leads are nurtured. And so, a few best practices to focus on again when lead sharing: agree up front how leads will be divided and when they will be sent. Is it going to be divided based on territory, industry, account, or are they going to get the full list? Make it clear before the event. And in terms of the cadence, ideally, partners should follow up with a lead within 24 to 48 hours of the email or the webinar, excuse me. You make sure to follow up as soon as possible, because after they watch this webinar, they're on to the next thing. They're going to forget about it. So you want to make sure to follow up while it's fresh in their mind. So the first touch is going to be a thank you and a link to the recording. Then you can roll into that nurture sequence. So joint messaging, try to keep the messaging aligned. If one partner sends something completely different, it can confuse the customer or the prospect. In terms of sales enablement, you want to give SDRs or AEs a simple talk track. We saw that you registered for our joint webinar with partner X. We wanted to follow up on XYZ. Make the outreach as relevant and timely as possible. Then also create a 3-touch email sequence for them based on the content of the actual webinar. And I think that's going to be huge, as well as just make it as easy and seamless as possible for your SDRs to follow up with the leads in a timely fashion. And so the takeaways from this episode with a webinar is: one, they're still one of the most effective co-marketing tactics in a marketer's playbook. They generate leads, they can build credibility, they bring partners together, and they put them in the forefront of your customers' minds. And again, you don't want to do a one-off marketing webinar. You want to build a integrated campaign. And for example, something that I've done in the past is I've worked with a vendor and we did a content syndication campaign. We generated 500 leads from this vendor over a 3-month time frame, and this was a asset that we promoted, a white paper, and we generated a bunch of these leads. We did a retargeting display campaign to further nurture those leads. Once we nurtured those leads in that 3-month time period, we then invited those 500 leads to the webinar, which is the same topic as the white paper they downloaded. After that, then we had an in-person event, and then we invited those webinar attendees to a regional local event where we did a seminar and training, and ended up getting folks who downloaded the white paper, went to the webinar, got them in a room in person with our partner, and eventually were able to sell our software and our services to a small percentage of those leads, but still very effective integrated campaign that we ran over a 2-quarter time period, which was great. We were able to sell to these folks, and it was a successful campaign. So I think trying to build an integrated campaign is always going to be better than a one-off campaign. So that's all I have for this episode. Thank you again for tuning in to the Partner Marketing Unlocked podcast. Again, if you've run a webinar with a partner that has worked or that has flopped, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. So make sure to connect with me on LinkedIn and share your experiences as well. So until next time, thank you so much. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel.